The rain came down in gray sheets over Asheville, North Carolina, flattening the distant peaks of the Blue Ridge Mountains into a watercolor blur. It was the kind of afternoon that pressed the air heavy against your chest, making you feel every quiet ache you tried to hide. Inside the Blue Ridge Animal Shelter, the chaotic symphony of barking, whining, and metal clattering echoed off concrete walls. Olivia Barrett paused just inside the double doors, her umbrella still dripping at her side, hair damp and sticking to her cheeks, heart pounding harder than she cared to admit. She'd told herself she was only there to drop off a donation, a half-truth she hoped would keep her grief at bay. But as the door clicked shut behind her, the noise seemed to dim, as if the world narrowed to a single thread. That's when she saw him. In the farthest kennel, almost hidden by shadow, a German shepherd lay curled against the wall, his body pressed so tight he seemed to be willing himself invisible. The others, pit bulls, labs, mutts of every shape, leapt and yipped. But this dog remained perfectly still. His fur was patchy, dulled with neglect, ribs pressed against skin, barely rising and falling. Olivia's breath caught. There was something about the utter stillness, the way his eyes didn't even flicker when the other dogs barked, that made her heart twist. Shelter workers bustled past, hauling mops and kibble bags. No one glanced at the silent dog. For a long moment, Olivia stood there, the concrete cold beneath her shoes, umbrella leaving a spreading puddle, unable to look away. It was as if some invisible wire stretched between her and the animal, both of them ghost-like, adrift in a world that had moved on. Angela, a shelter worker with tired eyes and a ponytail, finally noticed her. "Can I help you?" she asked, but Olivia just pointed. "That one, what's his name?" Angela's gaze softened. She lowered her voice as if speaking in church. "He's been like this for almost a year. Doesn't bark, doesn't eat unless we hand-feed him. No one even asks his name anymore." She fumbled with her clipboard. "Max, his name is Max." Olivia pressed a hand to her chest, feeling a pulse of something old and raw. She'd been a high school counselor for 20 years. She'd seen every kind of heartbreak in teenagers, loss, anger, numbness. Since her husband Dan died, she'd recognized all those wounds in herself. That fog of days when you felt barely real, when you'd do anything just to stop feeling at all. Looking at Max, she saw her own reflection, a soul battered so completely that even hope felt dangerous. She knelt, ignoring the chill seeping through her jeans. "Hey, Max," she murmured. No response. Not even a blink. His entire body turned to the wall, tail limp, ears drooping. There was no fear, just absence. A living ghost. A group of volunteers laughed as they led a bouncy terrier past. One of them, a college kid in a bright yellow raincoat, threw Olivia a glance. "That one's a lost cause. Some dogs just don't want saving," he said, not unkindly, but with the flat certainty of someone who'd never tasted real loss. Olivia bristled, jaw tight. She wanted to snap back, but the words dried up. She stared at Max, wrestling with something she didn't want to name, something that felt a lot like guilt. Was she really any different? After Dan's death, hadn't she walled herself off too? Kept everyone at arm's length, ignored her sister's calls, let dust gather on the piano Dan used to play. She'd mastered the art of being invisible in plain sight. Angela crouched beside her. He was surrendered after a tragedy, lost his family, never recovered. We tried everything. Some dogs bounce back. Max just didn't. As she spoke, thunder rolled outside, making the lights flicker. For a split second, Max's ear twitched toward the sound, and Olivia's breath hitched. It was the smallest movement, almost unnoticeable, but it felt monumental. A single green shoot in a burned forest. Angela straightened. We keep hoping the right person will come along, but he's not young anymore. People want puppies. Max just waits. Olivia's mind spun with questions. What happened to him? What did he lose? Why did this broken dog call to her in a way nothing else had for months? She heard her sister's voice in her mind. You need something new, Olivia, a fresh start. But the idea of a bright-eyed puppy suddenly felt wrong. She was tired of pretending everything could be fixed with a new beginning. Maybe what she needed wasn't something new, but someone who understood what it was to lose everything. She rose, knees popping, rain still beating at the windows. Angela was already moving on, clipboard tapping her palm. Olivia took one last look at Max. Her own reflection, haunted, hopeful, unfinished, looked back at her through the dull steel bars. She turned to leave, heart pounding, footsteps echoing in the quiet that followed. As she reached the lobby, some instinct pulled her back. She glanced over her shoulder. In the dim kennel, Max had shifted, just barely, one ear cocked in her direction. Not quite trust, but not indifference either. The smallest gesture, a thread of hope, impossibly fragile but real. Olivia walked out into the rain, knowing she couldn't leave that hope behind. Olivia barely slept that night. Rain rattled her cottage roof, wind moaned in the chimney, and her mind churned with images of the silent dog in the dark kennel. She thought of Max's vacant eyes, the way he flinched away from hope as if it might burn him. All the next morning, she moved through her routines in a fog. Coffee grown cold on the table, mail left unopened. Her late husband Dan's old flannel shirt draped over a kitchen chair like a memory that refused to let go. Her phone buzzed just after breakfast, a message from her sister, Marie. How did the shelter visit go? Please don't bring home a project, Liv. You deserve some peace. Maybe a little dog this time. Or a cat. Olivia stared at the screen, thumb hovering over the keys, but she didn't reply. Her own voice echoed inside her head, small but persistent. He's not a project. He's lost, like me. By noon, she couldn't resist any longer. The car ride back to the shelter felt longer than it was. The clouds had finally broken, but the air was heavy, the world washed clean and trembling on the edge of newness. Olivia parked, hands clammy on the wheel, nerves buzzing with the wild, impossible thought that she was about to change not just Max's life, but her own. Inside, the shelter hummed with Saturday bustle. Children squealed over puppies. Couples argued gently over which dog to pick. Volunteers swept puddles by the entrance. Angela glanced up from the counter, surprise flickering across her face. You're back, Olivia swallowed. I'd like to see Max again. Angela hesitated. Are you sure? She spoke quietly, glancing at a group of prospective adopters cooing over a golden retriever. Most people want an easy case, Max. He's never even wagged his tail in here. Olivia's reply was steady, but her hands shook. I'm not most people. Angela led her down the row of kennels, the air thick with disinfectant and anticipation. Max hadn't moved from his spot. He lay with his back to the world, body curled tight. But as Olivia knelt by his gate, something flickered. A tremor in his shoulder, the faintest quiver of his ears. He was listening. Angela watched from behind, arms folded. He's been through a lot, lost everyone he ever knew. Sometimes when the damage is that deep, they just stop trying. Are you sure you want to take this on? We have a whole litter of lab puppies. Easy, sweet. They'd help you heal. Olivia shook her head, voice thin but unwavering. He's the one. Please let me adopt him. Angela's mouth twisted. not quite a smile. She fetched a thick folder from the office, paperwork well worn, as if hope had frayed its edges over months of being untouched. As Olivia signed, her hands trembled so badly she nearly dropped the pen. Memories rose up, unbidden. Dan's hospice bed by the window, his hand limp in hers, the sound of rain the day he slipped away. She blinked hard, refusing to let tears fall. If she could survive that, she could survive anything. Once the forms were done, Angela ducked into the back and returned with a battered, faded red collar. It's his, only thing he came with. The collar's tag was nearly illegible, but Olivia could make out Max etched into the metal. She closed her fingers around it, promising herself she'd help him remember who he was. When the kennel door swung open, Max didn't move. He didn't growl, didn't snap, didn't even look up. His defeat was so total it seemed to suck the oxygen from the room. Olivia knelt beside him. "Come on, sweetheart, let's go home." Still nothing. Angela glanced away, uncomfortable. With a resolve she didn't know she possessed, Olivia slid her arms beneath Max's bony chest. He weighed less than he should, a ghost of a dog, fur rough and matted, ribs sharp under her hands. Lifting him was awkward, undignified, but she cradled him to her chest and whispered, "It's okay. You don't have to be brave yet." Angela helped prop open the doors, eyebrows raised, and Olivia carried Max through the lobby like a wounded soldier brought home from a forgotten war. In the parking lot, a family watched, the little boy pointing. "Mommy, is that dog sick?" Olivia looked away, cheeks burning. She eased Max into the back seat, settling him onto an old quilt Dan used to take on picnics. Max curled tight, eyes squeezed shut, shivering. Not from cold, but from some terror Olivia could only guess at. Before Olivia pulled away, Angela pressed the collar into her hand again. "If you ever need to bring him back, don't feel bad. Some dogs just can't." The words hung heavy in the air, a dare and a benediction. The drive home was silent. Olivia glanced in the rearview mirror over and over, but Max didn't move, didn't whine. The engine's hum, the rhythm of the road, none of it reached him. At one point, Olivia turned on the radio, old jazz filling the car, just to see if it would coax some response. Nothing. When she turned onto her tree-lined street, dappled sunlight flickering through spring leaves, something small and extraordinary happened. Max, for the first time, uncurled enough to lift his head. His eyes blinked in the afternoon light, just for a heartbeat. And he looked out the window. It was barely noticeable, a flicker, not even a gesture. But to Olivia, it felt like the world tilting toward hope. At home, her nephew Mason stood on the porch, arms crossed, watching with the skeptical seriousness only an 11-year-old could muster. "That's him?" Mason called as Olivia opened the door, Max's limp form draped over her arms. "He looks like he's given up." Olivia set Max down gently on the living room rug, meeting Mason's gaze. "Maybe, but I haven't." Mason shrugged, then knelt beside Max. He offered a tentative hand. Max didn't pull away, but neither did he respond. Olivia braced herself for disappointment from her family, but instead she saw a flicker of curiosity. And maybe, if she dared to believe it, the faintest ember of hope in the silent room. Outside, the rain finally stopped, leaving the world shimmering and uncertain. Inside, a woman and a wounded dog faced each other across the small distance between grief and grace. Both unsure, both battered, both still breathing. For the first time in a year, Max was home. And for the first time since Dan's death, Olivia felt the promise of something new. The smallest, most stubborn root of hope, cracking through the concrete of despair. The first days with Max in Olivia's mountain cottage unfolded in slow, measured increments, a gentle unraveling of time marked not by progress, but by presence. Spring had come to Asheville, but inside Olivia's world, everything moved with the hush of a winter morning. She carried the dog inside that first afternoon, arms straining under his awkward weight, and laid him gently on an old woven rug by the fireplace. The embers glowed faintly behind the grate, but the room felt colder than ever. Max didn't move. He curled into himself, nose tucked to his flank, as if to erase his own outline from existence. Olivia knelt beside him, her heart aching at the way his breath shuddered in and out, every rib visible under the dull, patchy fur. She set out bowls of fresh water and soft chicken, but Max ignored them, eyes squeezed shut. It was as if he were bracing for more loss, refusing even the possibility of comfort. Olivia settled on the couch across from him, a novel in hand she'd read a dozen times before. But the words blurred and drifted. The silence stretched long. Every so often, the house creaked, a memory shifting in the beams, the echo of laughter that used to fill the space. Sometimes Olivia imagined she could hear Dan's voice from the kitchen, a gentle tease or a half-finished melody hummed under his breath. But those days were gone, and now even her own footsteps seemed too loud. She tried everything she could think of to coax Max from his shell. She played soft jazz in the evenings, letting the trumpet notes mingle with the patter of rain on the windows. She left the door open during daylight hours, letting fresh air and birdsong roll through the rooms. She even read aloud, sometimes poetry, sometimes scraps from her late husband's letters, hoping the rhythm of her voice would become a bridge between them. "Today was hard, Max," she said one night, book open in her lap, the fire's glow painting soft gold across the floor. "But we made it through. That counts for something, doesn't it?" Her words faded into the hush. Max didn't stir. Yet as she spoke, she felt a subtle shift, not in him, but in herself. Each time she reached out, some part of her own numbness ebbed away. It hurt, but it was a living pain, a reminder she was still here, still capable of hope, no matter how small. Days passed. Olivia moved through her routines, careful and steady, up before dawn for a cup of strong coffee, a walk around the garden, feeding the birds, then back inside to check on Max. Always, he was in the same spot, motionless, except for the flicker of his eyes whenever she entered. When she cooked, she talked to him as she chopped vegetables or stirred soup, telling him stories about her students or memories from childhood. Sometimes she let the silence sit heavy between them. She learned that words were not always needed. Sometimes the greatest kindness was simply not leaving. Outside, the world moved on. The azaleas along the walkway bloomed riotously pink. Miss Carroll, her neighbor, stopped by with muffins and a sympathetic glance through the doorway. "That dog's got an old sadness in him," she remarked, voice hushed. Olivia nodded, understanding more than she could say. At night, Olivia made a habit of reading by the fire. She'd take out a worn copy of The Little Prince or a battered collection of Mary Oliver poems, books Dan had loved, and read quietly aloud. Her voice wavered sometimes, especially on passages about loss and homecoming. She told herself she was doing it for Max, but she realized the truth. She was reading to herself, filling the emptiness with stories of resilience. The rain was constant that week, tapping at the windows, drumming softly on the tin roof. Sometimes lightning flashed over the ridgeline, throwing strange shadows across the room. Olivia would glance over to see Max, ever still, only the occasional twitch of his ears betraying any sign of life. Then, one night, something changed. Olivia finished a chapter, her voice hoarse, and set the book aside. She banked the fire and turned out the lights, ready to retreat to her bedroom. Another night alone, another round of dreams that might or might not let her rest. As she stepped into the hallway, she paused. Behind her, in the darkness, she heard a faint sound, a soft shuffle, barely more than a whisper. She turned, heart thudding. Max stood at the threshold of her bedroom, a shadow among shadows. He didn't approach. Instead, he simply sat, head lowered, watching her with cautious eyes. Olivia felt a lump rise in her throat, surprise mingled with a fragile, impossible joy. She said nothing, afraid even to breathe too loudly and break the moment. Eventually, her exhaustion pulled her under, but she slept with the door open for the first time in months. In the morning, golden light spilled across the floor. Olivia woke with a start, the odd sense that she was not alone. She glanced down, and there, curled at the foot of her bed, tail tucked but breathing easy, was Max. He didn't look up, didn't move, but his presence filled the room with a warmth Olivia hadn't felt since before Dan's illness. She sat up slowly, not wanting to frighten him. "Good morning, Max," she whispered. The words felt like a prayer. Max's ear flicked, and for a heartbeat, Olivia saw something new in his eyes. Not happiness, not yet, but an openness, a willingness to exist in the same space as another soul. That day, Olivia moved through her routines as always, but with a sense of anticipation. The gap between them had narrowed, just a little. The cottage felt less like a mausoleum, more like a shelter. She realized that healing was not a single grand moment, but 1,000 small ones. Sitting quietly by the fire, the touch of sunlight on old fur, the simple act of not giving up. Olivia poured herself a second cup of coffee and gazed out the window, the mountain morning alive with birds and distant thunder. Behind her, Max lay in the doorway, not close but not hiding either. They were two souls, both battered, both waiting for the next chapter. It wasn't much, but for now it was enough. Days faded into weeks, and the world beyond Olivia's mountain cottage bloomed in slow-motion technicolor. Spring crept up the slopes, coaxing pale green from the maples and dappling the grass with early wildflowers. But inside Olivia's home, the pace was set by something deeper, gentler, more tentative than any season. It was the rhythm of two lives learning how to share space with loss, and the flicker of new hope. Olivia woke every morning before dawn. The old floorboards groaned beneath her feet as she moved through the kitchen, brewing her coffee, humming some half-remembered tune from her childhood. The quiet was comfortable now, filled with small, expectant silences rather than loneliness. Each day she greeted Max where he lay at the foot of her bed or by the fire, his ears perking up just enough to let her know he was listening. She'd murmur, "Morning, Max," as if speaking to a friend she'd known for years. Their routines became a lifeline. After breakfast, Olivia would tug on her boots and coax Max outside. At first he balked, pausing at the threshold, eyes wide and uncertain as the world greeted him with too much sky and too many smells. But Olivia never pushed. She'd kneel beside him, let him sniff the air, and wait for him to gather himself. Sometimes they'd just stand on the porch, letting the breeze carry the scent of pine and distant rain. One misty morning, Olivia dropped a bright red apple on the steps as she rummaged in her grocery bag. It rolled toward Max, thumping against his paw. He sniffed at it, then, almost imperceptibly, gave his tail a faint wag. Olivia's breath caught. It was the first sign of joy she'd seen in him. She knelt right there, apple forgotten, and wiped at her eyes, her chest swelling with gratitude so fierce it almost hurt. Their walks grew longer. Olivia took Max down winding trails through the woods behind the cottage. The first few times he trailed behind, pausing often, as if expecting the ground to fall away beneath him. But Olivia learned to talk softly, her voice steady and warm. She described the trees, pointed out a squirrel's nest, recited lines from the poetry she loved. Sometimes she fell quiet and let the forest speak for her. Max, for his part, moved closer each day, until one afternoon she realized he was walking beside her, matching her stride step for step. Meals became shared rituals. Olivia cooked simply: chicken and rice, scrambled eggs, roasted sweet potatoes, and always set a bowl beside her own plate at the kitchen table. At first, Max would only eat when she wasn't watching, but one evening, as rain hammered the roof and thunder rolled down from the hills, he padded over and laid his chin on her knee, waiting patiently. She laughed, a bright, unguarded sound that startled them both. The world outside their small sanctuary took notice. One afternoon, Miss Carol from next door, her silver hair twisted up in a bun, lips pursed in perennial disapproval, leaned over the fence as Olivia tended her garden. Max lay nearby, head on his paws, eyes half closed in the sun. "That dog's got an old sadness in him," Miss Carol observed, voice low and full of knowing. "But he follows you around now, doesn't he?" Olivia nodded, wiping dirt from her hands. "He's coming back to me, I think. Slowly." Miss Carol studied Max, then Olivia. "Sometimes it's the broken ones who end up saving us, honey. Don't forget that." Later that night, Olivia replayed the words as she watched Max curl into his favorite spot by the fire. She realized she wasn't the only one who saw how much pain he carried, or how far he'd come. She felt something shift inside her, an acceptance of the truth that healing was both private and communal, witnessed by those around you, even if you thought you were alone. There were setbacks, of course. Some mornings Max would retreat, refusing to eat or go outside. Loud noises, the bang of a dropped pan, the distant wail of a siren, sent him trembling to a corner. On those days, Olivia's patience was tested, but she reminded herself of the progress they'd made. She sat near him, humming softly or reading aloud, letting him know she was there. One particularly golden afternoon, Olivia sat at the table sorting through old photographs, Dan's laughter frozen in faded snapshots. Max wandered over and, instead of shrinking from her sadness, nudged his nose under her hand. Olivia let the tears fall, not from despair but relief. She realized Max was beginning to seek her out, not just tolerate her presence but crave it. It was subtle, a nudge, a soft look, a warm sigh as he lay beside her chair. But it felt like the world turning toward the light. On weekends, Olivia opened the cottage to friends and neighbors for coffee and quiet company. People came and went, but Max always stuck close, sometimes hiding behind Olivia, sometimes braving a pat on the head from a gentle visitor. The little girl from up the lane, Ruby, started stopping by after school. She'd sit cross-legged on the rug and whisper secrets to Max, who listened intently, his big brown eyes softening as he learned the comfort of a child's trust. With each passing day, Olivia watched Max begin to meet her gaze, holding it for longer than before. He stopped hiding when she entered a room. He started to approach her, especially in the quiet moments just before dusk, as if seeking permission to belong. The cottage, once haunted by silence, now thrummed with the pulse of two hearts growing braver together. It was a slow, uneven process. Progress measured in inches, not miles. But every step mattered. Olivia learned to recognize the signals, the tilt of Max's head when he wanted to go outside, the soft rumble in his chest when he dreamed, the way he'd curl at her feet and sigh as if he'd finally found the place where broken things could mend. One evening, as twilight pooled blue and gold across the mountains, Olivia and Max sat together on the porch. Fireflies blinked in the tall grass, and the first stars pricked holes in the indigo sky. Olivia reached over and laid a hand on Max's head, feeling the warmth of his trust. He leaned into her touch, his body at ease. For the first time, Olivia felt her own grief loosen its grip. She understood then that healing wasn't about forgetting loss. It was about letting the light in, one gentle moment at a time. In the hush of the coming night, Olivia whispered, "We're going to be okay, Max." And for once, she truly believed it. Spring break arrived on a gust of mountain wind, carrying with it the sound of distant laughter and the bright, boisterous energy of Olivia's nephew, Mason. At 11, Mason was a contradiction, a bundle of kinetic joy wrapped around a core of quiet sensitivity. He showed up on Olivia's porch with a battered duffel bag, a skateboard tucked under one arm, and an air of barely contained curiosity. "Is he here?" Mason asked before even setting foot inside, eyes wide with the anticipation that only children possess. Olivia nodded, already feeling her own nerves flutter. Max was lying by the window, gaze fixed on a sunbeam as if watching something only he could see. Mason tiptoed into the living room, dropping to his knees a respectful distance away. For a moment, the boy just watched, as if measuring the silent dog against stories he'd heard from his mother, Olivia's sister, about broken animals and gentle rescues. "Is Max broken or just tired?" Mason asked, voice low, eyes earnest. Olivia knelt beside him, her hand resting lightly on Mason's shoulder. "Sometimes, when you lose a lot, it makes you tired all the way through. But tired isn't forever." Mason nodded, thoughtful. He pulled a peanut butter sandwich from his backpack, tore off a corner, and held it out on an open palm. Max didn't move. The air in the room tightened, the moment suspended. Olivia watched, willing Max to respond, but he only flicked his eyes toward Mason and then away. Mason waited, patience blossoming where most children would have grown restless. After a full minute, he pulled his hand back, gave a small shrug, and took a bite himself. "That's okay. Sometimes it takes me a while to trust new people, too." That simple acceptance seemed to shift something in the room. Later that afternoon, Mason left a trail of breadcrumbs and bits of sandwich crust along the rug, pretending not to watch as Max inched closer after everyone had left the room. Olivia caught the boy peeking around the corner, grinning when he saw the crumbs disappear one by one. Their days settled into an uneasy rhythm. Olivia found herself stretched in new ways, balancing Mason's boundless energy and Max's caution. They explored the woods behind the cottage, Mason darting ahead with a stick transformed into a sword, Olivia calling out warnings about snakes, while Max followed at a slow, uncertain pace. One morning, as sunlight spilled like gold coins across the yard, Mason took a spill on the hiking trail. He was running too fast, feet slipping on a patch of moss, and he went down hard, skinning his knee. He tried to be brave, but his chin trembled as he sat in the dirt, eyes squeezed shut against tears. Olivia rushed to his side, but before she could reach him, Max bounded past. For the first time, the dog moved with purpose, a spark of something fierce and protective lighting in his eyes. He licked Mason's cheek, standing so close the boy could bury his face in Max's rough fur. Max's body tensed as two hikers rounded the bend, and for the first time since coming home, he let out a deep, low growl, a warning not of fear, but of guardianship. Mason's tears dried, He wrapped his arms around Max's neck, laughing through the last of his pain. "It's okay, buddy. You got me. I'm fine." The hikers waved, understanding, and moved on. Olivia watched the scene unfold, heart swelling with pride and wonder. In that moment, Max wasn't just surviving. He was beginning to love again. Back at the cottage, Mason's story became legend. He regaled Olivia with tales of Max's heroism, embellishing the growl until it became a roar, the lick into a full-body rescue. "He's like a wolf," Mason insisted. Olivia only smiled, letting the boy have his myth. Max's transformation wasn't limited to moments of crisis. Over the week, he and Mason built a tentative friendship. Mason read comic books aloud, sprawled on the floor, Max's head resting on his leg. They watched rainstorms together, counting the seconds between lightning and thunder. One night, Mason left his bedroom door ajar and woke to find Max curled on the rug beside his bed, a silent guardian chasing away nightmares. For Olivia, the change was almost miraculous. She saw Max's eyes brighten, his tail wag more often, his steps grow bolder. He started greeting her at the door, barking once, a sharp, joyous sound that startled both of them the first time it happened. She called her sister to share the news, her voice trembling with excitement. "He's coming back, Marie. He really is." Marie was quiet for a moment on the other end. "And so are you, Liv." With Mason around, the house filled with laughter, the kind that swept up dust in the corners and made even the darkest memories feel lighter. Olivia watched as her nephew coaxed Max out of hiding, each act of kindness building trust between them all. On the last night of Mason's visit, they sat around the kitchen table, sharing stories and ice cream. Max lay beneath the table, his nose brushing against Mason's bare foot. The boy reached down, scratching behind Max's ears, and the dog sighed, eyes closing in contentment. "Are you going to be okay, Max?" Mason asked, his voice heavy with sleep and the ache of impending goodbyes. Olivia looked at her nephew, then at the dog who had, against all odds, begun to heal. "He's going to be better than okay," she said softly. "He's going to be happy." As Mason climbed into bed for his last night at the cottage, he whispered, "Don't worry, Max. I'll come back, and I'll bring more sandwiches next time." Olivia stood in the doorway, watching Max settle at the foot of Mason's bed, both of them safe in the quiet hush of spring. She realized then that sometimes miracles weren't thunderclaps or blinding light. Sometimes they arrived as small, patient acts of trust, a sandwich, a gentle touch, a promise to return. And in the warmth of that gentle night, Olivia knew for certain that hope, once kindled, was nearly impossible to extinguish. The week after Mason left was marked by a new sense of possibility, but also by growing uncertainty. The cottage felt quieter, the laughter echoing in empty corners as Olivia put away Mason's favorite mug and smoothed the blankets on his bed. Max wandered the house restlessly for days, nosing at Mason's backpack, forgotten under the stairs, and curling up by the door as if waiting for the boy to burst through at any moment. Olivia understood the feeling all too well. Absence, she realized, was a weight, a quiet ache that settled into every room. She tried to keep their routines steady. Each morning, Olivia and Max took their walk along the foggy mountain trails. At first, Max lagged behind, stopping to sniff the air, ears pricked as if listening for Mason's laughter. But little by little, he found comfort in the familiar. The creak of pine trees, the flutter of chickadees, the rich scent of damp earth. Olivia spoke softly as they walked, recounting stories of Mason's bravery or sharing gentle hopes for the future. Max began to match her pace, drawing close when she grew quiet. pressing his head to her hand, as if reminding her she wasn't alone. It was on one of those walks that the weather shifted. The morning sky was dark and mottled, thick with the promise of a southern thunderstorm. Olivia hurried Max back home just as the first fat drops began to fall, the wind rising, rattling the windows. By the time they stepped onto the porch, rain was falling in sheets, pounding the roof and swallowing the distant view of the Blue Ridge peaks. Inside, the cottage glowed with a soft golden light. Olivia made tea and lit candles against the growing gloom. She found Max curled on his bed, staring at the door, body tense. Thunder boomed overhead, shaking the panes and making Olivia's heart stutter in her chest. Storms had always unsettled her, their chaos a cruel reminder of things she couldn't control. She moved through the house, checking on small things, closing the windows, tucking towels under the drafty door, her movements tight with anxiety. When lightning split the sky, Max flinched but didn't bolt. Instead, he stood up, shook out his coat, and padded after Olivia, his presence like a shadow with weight. It occurred to her suddenly that she wasn't the only one who'd learned how to weather storms. A sudden crash of thunder brought a knock at the door. Olivia opened it to find her neighbor, Miss Carroll, standing on the porch, clutching a flashlight and a tin of cookies. "Lights are out up the road," she announced, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "Figured you could use some company." No sooner had she spoken than the house plunged into darkness. The power was out, the refrigerator's hum silenced, the clock on the stove blinking into nothing. Olivia felt her chest tighten, old fears rising. The isolation of stormy nights after Dan's death, the way shadows grew when the world shrank to candlelight. She glanced at Max, half expecting him to cower, but he only sniffed the air and sat calmly by her feet. Moments later, Olivia's phone chimed. It was Mason, texting from his mother's house in Charlotte. "Are you okay? I saw on TV there's a big storm. Is Max scared?" Olivia smiled, thumbs moving quickly. "We're together. He's being brave for both of us." The three of them, Olivia, Miss Carroll, and Max, gathered in the living room. Miss Carroll insisted on building a blanket fort, pulling cushions from the couch and draping quilts to make a cozy den in the center of the room. Candles flickered, casting tall shadows on the walls. Olivia and her neighbor sat close, sipping tea and sharing stories of past storms. Max settled between them, his big body stretched out so both women could rest a hand on his back. Mason called, his voice crackling with excitement and worry. Olivia put him on speakerphone, and Mason's voice filled the cottage, his questions rapid fire. "Is Max okay? Did he hide under the bed? Did you make him a thunder shirt?" Olivia glanced at Max, who yawned and leaned his head against her leg, surprisingly calm. "He's not hiding," Olivia replied. "He's right here with us." Outside, the storm raged. Trees bent and the wind howled. But inside the fort, a small, bright world formed, one where fear was replaced with shared warmth and comfort. Miss Carroll hummed an old lullaby. Mason, on the phone, whispered that he missed them. Olivia squeezed Max's paw, feeling the slow, steady rhythm of his breath. Then came a moment Olivia would remember for the rest of her life. Lightning flashed. Thunder cracked so loud it rattled the dishes, and Mason's voice broke through the static. "Tell Max he's the bravest dog I know." As if understanding, Max stood, shook himself, and barked once, a clear, steady sound. It wasn't frantic or afraid, but purposeful, as if he were answering Mason, saying, "I'm here. I'm not afraid anymore." The storm began to ease, rain softening to a whisper. The power flickered back on, lights humming to life. Olivia exhaled, realizing she'd been holding her breath for hours. Miss Carroll patted her hand. "That dog of yours, he's something special." That night, after Miss Carroll went home and Olivia tidied the house, she found Max waiting by the door. As she knelt beside him, he wagged his tail and pressed his head into her chest. She hugged him, feeling the last shivers of fear melt away. The next morning was crisp and clear, sunlight glinting off every leaf. Olivia stood on the porch, mug in hand, watching Max explore the yard. When she opened the door to call him in, Max bounded up the steps and barked, a real, joyful bark, tail sweeping the air. Olivia laughed, her heart light. The storm had tested them both, forced them to face old fears, and taught them something new. Max found his courage not by running away, but by staying close, protecting, comforting, loving. And in return, Olivia found her own strength rekindled by his steady presence. As they stepped back inside, the cottage felt different, warmer, safer, alive with the echo of a single, hopeful bark that promised better days to come. The day Olivia decided to bring Max to her school's Reading with Dogs event dawned soft and golden, sunlight filtering through the budding dogwoods as if the world itself was giving its blessing. Olivia woke early, nerves fluttering in her stomach, and found Max already at the foot of her bed, watching her with those quiet, thoughtful eyes that now held a trace of confidence. She had spent the last few days going back and forth, wondering if he was ready. It had been several weeks since the thunderstorm, the night Max had found his courage not just for himself, but for Olivia and Mason. Since then, Max had transformed in small, visible ways, greeting neighbors with cautious wags, seeking out Olivia's company in the garden, even barking at the mail truck with the pride of a sentry defending his home. But this would be different. This would be public, noisy, unpredictable, a true test. At breakfast, Olivia spooned scrambled eggs into a bowl for Max and added a sliver of cheese, his new favorite treat. He ate calmly, pausing to rest his chin on her knee, as if sensing her apprehension and offering reassurance. "We're going to school today," she told him, stroking the soft fur behind his ears. "You're going to help some kids feel brave." She packed his leash, a soft blanket, and a handful of treats into a canvas tote, and together they walked the short distance to Blue Ridge Middle School. The halls were bright and bustling, the air thick with anticipation as children clustered in small groups, clutching worn paperbacks and dog-eared comics. The school counselor, Mrs. Lynn, met Olivia at the door, her face lighting up when she saw Max. "You brought him!" Mrs. Lynn exclaimed, kneeling to greet Max with a gentle hand. "He's already famous around here. The kids have been asking about the miracle dog all week." Olivia smiled, feeling a surge of pride mixed with nervousness. Let's hope he lives up to the hype. They led Max to the library, which had been transformed for the event. Beanbags scattered on the floor, posters of book covers taped to the windows, and a makeshift stage decorated with paw print banners. Children filtered in, some chattering excitedly, others hovering near the door, their faces anxious and shy. Olivia recognized a few: students who struggled with reading aloud, kids who found comfort in animals more than people. She settled Max on his blanket near the center of the room, kneeling beside him as the first wave of children approached. At first, Max stayed perfectly still, his ears back, gaze low but steady. One small boy reached out, hand trembling, and Max sniffed it gently before lowering his head into the boy's lap. The room seemed to exhale. Children gathered closer, voices softening, eyes growing wide with wonder. A particularly shy girl named Ruby sat cross-legged beside Max, clutching a battered copy of Charlotte's Web. She opened the book, voice barely a whisper, and began to read. At first, the words tangled, her breath coming short. Max responded by resting his head gently on her knee, warm and reassuring. Ruby's voice grew steadier, rising above the ambient hush. When she finished her chapter, the other children applauded, and Ruby grinned, a rare, radiant smile. Olivia watched, heart swelling. All around the library, children and teachers exchanged glances. Whispers rippled through the adults. "Look at him with Ruby. He's so calm. Do you think he'd visit my classroom?" For the first time in a long while, Olivia felt herself part of something bigger than her own grief. A community witnessing healing in real time. Midway through the morning, the principal, Mr. Riley, stopped by. He was a tall man with kind eyes and a reputation for toughness, but he knelt on the floor next to Max with surprising gentleness. "He's got a gift," Mr. Riley said, scratching Max's chin. "Ever thought about therapy work? The local rehab center's been looking for a dog just like him. His story, it could mean a lot to people." Olivia hesitated. The idea of Max touching more lives was thrilling but daunting. Could she really trust him to face such big new challenges? And could she trust herself to let him try? As if reading her thoughts, Max shifted closer, nudging his nose into her palm. Olivia looked into his eyes and saw not the emptiness of the shelter, but the steady warmth of a dog who had survived, endured, and emerged with something to give. At the end of the event, Mrs. Lynn presented Max with a shiny new tag that read, "Therapy Dog in Training." The children clapped, and Ruby ran over to hug Olivia, then Max. "Can he come every week?" Ruby asked, eyes shining. "We'll do our best," Olivia promised, hugging her back. Max barked once, as if in agreement, and wagged his tail for all to see. On the walk home, Olivia let the leash go slack, trusting Max to stay at her side. The world felt wider, brighter, a place where old sadness could be transformed into something gentle and strong. Neighbors waved from porches. Even Miss Carroll called out, "That dog of yours is a local celebrity now!" That evening, as the sun dipped behind the mountains, Olivia sat on the porch with Max at her feet, the new tag glinting in the fading light. She stroked his ears, thinking of all the ripples their story had already sent through the community. Children finding their voices, adults rethinking what brokenness looked like, a school librarian planning the next Reading with Dogs event. She realized then that Max's healing was contagious, his courage inspiring others to open their hearts. In loving Max, Olivia had unwittingly invited hope into dozens of lives, hers, Mason's, Ruby's, and now perhaps a whole town's. Max nudged her hand, then rested his head in her lap, a contented sigh slipping from his chest. For the first time in years, Olivia let herself believe in the possibility of more. More connection, more kindness, more small miracles waiting just beyond the horizon. And as the last light faded, the community that had once felt so far away seemed to draw closer, united by the simple, extraordinary story of a dog who refused to give up, and the people who learned to follow his lead. Spring rolled into summer, and Olivia's cottage began to feel more like a crossroads than a sanctuary, where stories of loss and hope converged, and something fragile yet resilient blossomed in the hearts of everyone who passed through. Max had settled into his new rhythm as therapy dog in training, earning a reputation in town as much for his gentle calm as for the invisible scars he carried. Each outing, whether to the rehab center, the school, or even the library's reading hour, etched more confidence into his step and more light into his gaze. Olivia was surprised by how much Max's transformation seemed to open her own heart. She found herself saying yes to things she would have avoided months earlier: a neighbor's invitation to a potluck, a seat at the community choir, Even the courage to speak at a parent meeting about the power of patience and second chances. Her grief wasn't gone, but it had changed shape, becoming less a stone she dragged and more a river she learned to cross, step by step. It was on an ordinary Monday that a call from Angela at the animal shelter upended the gentle flow of life. "Olivia, I know you're busy," Angela said, voice hopeful and urgent, "but we have a new arrival who reminds me a lot of Max. Her name's Daisy. She's having a hard time." Olivia felt her stomach tighten. She glanced at Max, now sprawled at her feet, snoring gently, sunlight warming his black and tan fur. He seemed so content, so changed from the hollow creature she'd found almost a year ago. Was she really ready to bring another storm into their hard-won peace? But Angela's words echoed in her head. "She reminds me a lot of Max." Olivia found herself agreeing to foster Daisy just for a while. She made up the spare bedroom with soft blankets, set out a new bowl, and tried to keep her nerves at bay. The first meeting was nothing like she'd hoped. Daisy, a small, wiry mix of border collie and something else wild, cowered in her carrier, eyes darting, every muscle tensed to bolt. When Olivia tried to coax her out, Daisy snapped at the air, then retreated to the farthest corner, shaking so hard her tags rattled. Olivia kept her voice calm and low, heart pounding, determined not to give up. Max watched all this with a patient stillness, a wisdom that seemed almost human. He didn't approach Daisy. Instead, he lay across the room, head on his paws, making no demands. For days, he simply occupied the same space, breathing quietly, offering silent testimony that healing was possible, even when it felt out of reach. Olivia was reminded of those first weeks with Max, how she'd learned to wait, to let trust unfurl at its own stubborn pace. She moved gently, reading her evening stories aloud with the door open, never pushing Daisy to join, but always making sure the invitation was there. She watched as Daisy flinched at every creak, as her eyes tracked Olivia's every move, as she refused food unless left alone. Each setback stung, but Olivia refused to lose hope, and it was Max, in his quiet, persistent way, who made the breakthrough. One night, a thunderstorm rolled over the mountains, electricity flickering in the sky. Daisy cowered beneath a chair, whimpering, lost in panic. Max, calm as a stone, rose from his bed and settled a few feet away, not looking at Daisy, but making his presence known. He didn't force himself on her. He didn't even touch her. Instead, he closed his eyes and let out a deep, slow breath, a gesture of peace and safety. Daisy watched him. Slowly, she inched forward, drawn by some magnetism she barely understood. She lay down near Max, close enough to feel the warmth of another living body, but not close enough to touch. It was the first time she'd chosen to share space with anyone since arriving. From that moment, change came in increments. Daisy copied Max, following him to the back door for walks, tentatively sniffing at the bowl beside his at mealtime. She stopped snapping at Olivia and began watching her with wide, curious eyes. The two dogs moved in orbit around each other. Max, the calm center. Daisy, a skittish comet learning to trust gravity again. It was Max who led her outside to the yard, teaching by example that the world was full of new smells and hidden joys. Daisy began chasing butterflies, darting through the tall grass while Max watched with the bemused patience of an older brother. Occasionally, she'd return to his side, nuzzling under his chin for comfort. Olivia watched it all unfold, both moved and awed. She realized one afternoon, as the dogs lay together in the shade, that Max had become a guide and a healer, not just for Daisy, but for everyone around him. His journey had come full circle, He was no longer the broken soul in need of rescue, but the lighthouse drawing others in from the storm. The next time Olivia took Max to the rehab center, Daisy came along, trembling but willing. The therapist greeted them with a smile and invited the dogs into a circle of patience, a group session for parents grieving lost children. Max settled near a weeping woman, resting his head in her lap, his eyes deep with empathy. Daisy hesitated, then curled at the woman's feet, pressing close as if offering her own fragile hope. Afterward, the woman hugged Olivia and whispered, "Your dogs. They helped me breathe again." Driving home that evening, Olivia was overwhelmed by the depth of what she'd witnessed. She glanced in the rearview mirror at Max and Daisy, lying side by side, and felt the fullness of everything they'd endured and everything they'd given back to the world. She understood then that healing was not a closed circle, but an ever-expanding ripple, one wounded soul reaching out to another, creating space for hope to take root. In helping Daisy, Max had found purpose beyond survival. In helping others, Olivia felt her own heart open wide. And as dusk gathered over the mountains, Olivia promised herself to always make room for the next soul in need, because she'd learned that no matter how broken we feel, there's always more love to give, and always, always, another chance to begin again. As the summer waned and the first hints of autumn crept into the leaves, Olivia found herself growing contemplative, more aware than ever of the quiet, nearly invisible changes that had unfolded in her life since Max had entered it. The routine of daily living, the morning walks, shared meals, evenings on the porch, remained much the same, but the world inside her felt utterly transformed. One crisp September afternoon, Olivia sat at her old kitchen table, pen in hand. The pages of her journal spread before her like a map of where she'd been and where she still hoped to go. Max and Daisy dozed at her feet, sunlight warming their backs. For the first time in years, Olivia felt compelled not just to live her story, but to understand it. She began to write, not only about what had happened, but about what it had meant. "Patience is the measure of real healing," she scribbled. "It's never loud. It's in the waiting, in the gentle repetition of trust, not grand gestures. In believing, even when the world gives you every reason to give up, that something good can grow from emptiness." Her mind drifted back to the very first day she'd seen Max. How numb she'd felt, how much his sorrow had mirrored her own. She remembered the ache of bringing him home, the weight of being responsible for a creature so fragile, and how both of them had learned, in their own time, to let others in. It struck her just how many people and places had been quietly altered by their journey. She thought of Mason, who visited every chance he got, growing from an anxious boy into a kind and empathetic teenager. Mason had started volunteering at the shelter, sitting for hours with the shyest dogs, using the same gentle patience he'd seen Olivia and Max practice. "Sometimes you just gotta wait with them, Aunt Liv," he'd said, as if this truth had always lived in his bones. She remembered Ruby, the shy girl from the reading event, who now read aloud with confidence not only to dogs, but to her classmates. Ruby had written Olivia a thank you note, decorated with paw prints and a stick figure Max, that read, "Max made me brave, now I help others who are scared to read." Letters from parents and teachers began to fill Olivia's mailbox and email inbox. A mother wrote about her son, who had struggled with grief after his father's passing, and how meeting Max had sparked hope in him. A librarian shared how the Reading with Dogs program had changed the culture of the school. Kids who once avoided the library now flocked to Story Hour, drawn by the calm and acceptance that Max radiated. Even Miss Carroll, the ever-practical neighbor, told Olivia that watching Max and Daisy had inspired her to take in an old, half-blind cat from the shelter. The most surprising ripple came from the rehab center, where the therapists began inviting Olivia, Max, and Daisy to group sessions every month. The effect was profound. Patients who had refused to speak opened up, sometimes speaking first to the dogs, then to each other. The act of stroking Max's fur or watching Daisy overcome her skittishness reminded everyone that progress was measured in small victories, not dramatic recoveries. Olivia learned that presence, not perfection, was the greatest gift she or her dogs could give. She often wondered if she had saved Max, or if he had saved her, or if the act of saving each other was less a moment and more a process, a back-and-forth dance, sometimes halting, sometimes clumsy, but always moving, however slowly, toward connection. The truth, Olivia realized, was that they had both needed to be seen, needed to be needed to trust that even the most battered spirits could become beacons for others. Her home, once a place of sorrow and silence, had grown lively and warm, a haven filled with stories, laughter, and the shuffling of paws on the old hardwood floors. Olivia invited more neighbors and friends in. Mason and Ruby started a junior readers club that met in her living room. Max and Daisy curled at their feet as the children read and giggled, unafraid to stumble over words. Sometimes, Olivia and Mason would sit outside beneath the changing leaves, watching the dogs chase each other across the yard, and Mason would ask big questions about loss, love, and why people and dogs sometimes had to hurt before they could heal. Olivia answered as best she could, always returning to the lesson Max had taught her. Sometimes the bravest thing we can do is just wait and love and not give up. It wasn't always easy. There were still hard days, anniversaries of Dan's death that left Olivia raw, storms that sent Daisy trembling, old scars that flared unexpectedly. But those moments didn't feel hopeless anymore. Now they were woven into a larger tapestry, one filled with acts of kindness, courage, and the steady assurance that hope, even when buried deep, could be coaxed back into the light. As she closed her journal, Olivia smiled at Max and Daisy. "We've come a long way, haven't we?" Max lifted his head, tail thumping, as if in answer. Daisy crept closer, nudging her nose into Olivia's palm. The simple, wordless connection among the three of them was more powerful than any speech or story. Later, as dusk gathered and Mason joined them on the porch, Olivia thought about all the lives their little family had touched. Neighbors, children, strangers at the shelter, even a grieving mother at the rehab center. The circle kept widening. Max's journey from broken to beacon had proven, to everyone who met him, that trauma did not have to be the end of the story. There was always another page, another day, another chance. That night, as Olivia drifted off to sleep, the last thing she heard was Max's gentle breathing and Mason's soft voice promising, "I'll always look out for the quiet ones, Aunt Liv, just like you did for Max." And with that, Olivia knew their story was more than survival. It was a legacy, etched in the hearts of all who believed in the quiet, relentless power of hope. Autumn's golden light settled gently over the cottage, casting long shadows through the oaks and maples, turning each leaf into a patch of living flame. Olivia felt a bittersweet peace as she walked the familiar trails with Max and Daisy, Mason by her side whenever school and life allowed. Every day, the world seemed both impossibly precious and delicately finite, as if every color, every gust of wind, was a reminder to cherish the small miracles while they lasted. Max had grown old in the most beautiful way. His once ragged fur had filled out, silver now feathering his muzzle and paws. He no longer rushed to greet every visitor or bounded through the yard after Daisy. Instead, He moved with dignity and intention, savoring the sunshine, taking time to greet each neighbor, each child, each friend who stopped by to see the dog who had once been invisible behind shelter bars. He basked in the admiration, but Olivia saw in his deep, wise eyes a gentle resignation, a readiness, not for another adventure, but for rest. The house was never empty. Olivia's living room filled with the warmth of community, children reading aloud to Max, neighbors sharing stories over coffee, letters arriving from people as far away as the city, some wanting to meet the miracle dog, others simply seeking advice on how to help an animal or person find hope again. Mason, now a teenager, was always at the center of the commotion, his laughter infectious, his gentle ways with Max and Daisy a living echo of all he'd learned. One golden afternoon, Olivia found Max lying under the old oak tree in the backyard, the same spot where he'd first dared to step out of his own shadow. Daisy curled at his side, and Mason sat quietly nearby, fingers brushing through Max's soft fur. The air was full of falling leaves and the promise of change. Olivia joined them, lowering herself carefully beside Max. She stroked his head, remembering all the days and nights they'd survived together, every setback, every victory, every moment when hope had seemed to slip just out of reach, only to return in the form of a wagging tail or a warm, steady gaze. She whispered, "You did good, Max. You did so good." Mason looked up, his face bright with a boy's faith and shadowed with the first hints of manhood. "He's tired, Aunt Liv, but he's happy. He's not scared anymore." They sat that way until the sun began to set, painting the sky with colors too wild to name. That night, Olivia dreamed of Max as he had once been, strong and proud, running through endless fields, always coming home. The next morning, Olivia awoke to an unusual quiet. She padded into the yard, the dew cool beneath her feet, and found Max curled beneath the oak, his breath stilled, his body at peace. Daisy whimpered, nuzzling against her old friend. Olivia knelt, her grief as raw as it had ever been, but there was comfort too, a certainty that Max had known he was loved, had found his way home in every sense of the word. News of Max's passing spread quickly through the neighborhood and beyond. Cards and flowers arrived at Olivia's door. Mason's friends came by after school, each sharing a favorite memory, how Max had listened to their secrets, protected them during thunderstorms, offered quiet comfort when words failed. Ruby and the other children from the reading program created a mural at the library, painting Max's likeness beside a mountain sunrise, paws planted firmly in the grass, as if he were watching over everyone still. Olivia organized a memorial at the shelter where she'd first met Max. She read aloud from her journal, voice trembling, "For every soul who feels overlooked, for every creature who waits for hope, let Max's story remind you, love, patiently given, can transform everything." The community unveiled a wooden bench in the shelter's garden, a plaque gleaming in the autumn light. "For Max, who waited and taught us how to wait for hope." Mason held Max's old, battered collar, fingers tracing the worn letters. "I'll always look out for the quiet ones," he promised. Olivia hugged him close, the two of them joined by the invisible thread of every life Max had touched. In the days and weeks that followed, Olivia poured herself into her writing. She finished a memoir, What Max Taught Me, weaving together stories of loss and grace, defeat and redemption. The final chapter was not a goodbye, but an invitation, a call to action for everyone who had ever loved, ever waited, ever wondered if their efforts mattered. If you've ever felt broken, remember, healing can begin with the smallest act of kindness. You don't need to be perfect or fearless or unscarred. You just need to show up, to wait with someone through their darkness, to offer love even when you're not sure it will be returned. Max taught us that every soul deserves a second chance, and that love, patiently given, can change not only a life, but an entire world. The memoir sparked a new wave of adoptions and fosters at the shelter. Families brought home older dogs, anxious cats, even rabbits and birds with battered wings. Olivia spoke at local schools and libraries, always sharing Max's legacy, the truth that the ones most in need of love are often the ones who will give the most back. On the anniversary of Max's passing, Olivia and Mason visited the shelter bench. Daisy, older now but still vibrant, settled at their feet. Olivia pressed her palm to the warm wood, feeling the sun and the echoes of every story that had begun with a single, silent dog who refused to give up. She looked up, eyes shining. If you believe in hope, if you want to see the world change, don't overlook the quiet ones. Wait with them, love them, the rest will follow. And as they walked home together, the air full of new beginnings, Olivia felt Max's presence everywhere, in the laughter of children, the kindness of strangers, the joy of a dog finally, eternally at peace. His story lived on, not just in memory, but in action, in every heart that chose, because of him, to hope again. If you found hope in Max's story, share it. Like follow and pass it on. There's always another soul waiting to be seen, waiting for love, waiting, like Max, for someone to believe in them.